Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I want to bring you a guide on how you can play aggressive, play the map, and therefore try to counter a lot of these very greedy plays that we are seeing on the ladder currently. I'm talking about fast castle, I'm talking about 2DC styles, and we're going to try to see, okay, what does it mean when we have the map control and they don't, and how does that affect their strategy? We're going to talk a little bit about how you can use a 2-scout opener to deny food and therefore use that leverage point of having that extra food where they don't to try to end the games very quickly, so you don't have long games against people who just get to Castle Age and maybe they get better units and then you get countered. So I'm going to show you a game here versus Ravane, who's currently ranked 9 on ladder, and Ravane has beaten me numerous times, I'll tell you that much. We're opening up with a 2-scout opener here as JD versus Hrass. Hrass likes to fast castle in this matchup because Hrass is very quick at doing that. Before JD can really ramp up and get the experience that she needs, they can usually get to Castle Age and try to counter the knights with their own knights or a spearman crossbow comp. We're trying to not make that happen, so we're actually going to go for a 2-scout opener, get as many sheep as possible so that they don't have enough sheep to go for castle. And even if they do get castle, they will not have the food they need, so they need to do farms. That's the whole point of this 2-scout opener. Whenever we talk about fast castle, a lot of people always think of gold. I need to deny gold. It's very important for me to deny the gold because they need it for upgrades, monks, new units that cost gold. But in reality, a lot of the times when you're playing aggressive, you aren't really thinking too much about the gold. You want to actually know what type of units can your opponent make, because a lot of the times you're seeing men-at-arms and knights being very, very powerful, even mangonels against range comps. And those units are very hard to get out if you don't have the resources you need. So we are already from minute 0 trying to already deny those food sources through the 2nd scout. This is a very good tactic to use, and you can use it pretty much against any civ, I would say, but it's very good against those civs that typically like to go fast castle. Now, some fast castle civs have a lot of extra food, like Ottomans. Other civs, like Hrass, struggle a little bit more in the food department. Japanese is another one that also do have a lot of extra food, but they still suffer if they don't have the sheep. So if you get 15 sheep and they get maybe 7 or something, they still have their farms, it can usually still go really well to use this strategy, and I would highly recommend it. Remember, you are actually also getting the sheep, and so if you are a knight civ or just in general playing a very food-heavy composition, then you will be very well off with all these extra sheep. It boosts your economy a lot, and it keeps you safe when it comes to the raids and so on. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you can position your economy. So for now, we're just going for a standard H-up. I'm going to speed the game up a little bit here. We're going to go with School of Cavalry, obviously. We want to get those knights out. And then we're going to try to see if we can do some damage. We see our opponent here has a very small amount of sheep here, and we have a pretty good amount overall. If we do a select all here, we can see we have about 16 sheep in total. And we're going to find a few more over here, so it ends up being a really good amount. Here's another one, and I think I find another 3 here. So we end up having 19 sheep. This is almost all of the sheep that are on the map, and this means that our aggression will work very well because our opponent will not have food. Another thing you can do, and I've talked about this in previous videos, is to try to spread out their deer. It's very annoying to gather from deer that are stuck in the wood lines, like this, or that are just in general very far spread apart, because 50 wood for a drop-off point is quite a lot if you have to build a lot of them. We need to take a little bit of a look here of how our opponent's spawn is in general. And we want to do that whenever we want to play aggression against these types of civs, because there's a difference between the opponent having front spawns or back spawns resources. If they have all their food in the front, obviously that's going to be a lot easier for us to attack than if it's all in the back. Try to pay attention to when you are raiding your opponent, when you are just scouting in the early game, where are they potentially going to put their vills. And so we see that they have berries here, they have a deer camp here, and then they have boar and deers in the bottom. This means that if our aggression comes from the bottom side, they're going to have those resources denied. They don't have a lot of extra resources in the top besides their berries and their wood. The wood is going to be quite important here, because if our opponent wants to go for farms, we're going to find a lot of vills there gathering that wood. And so in the situation where they can't move out of their base because they are sticking to this fast castle strat and they don't have the units to defend villagers going outside of their base, you will probably have to focus on the wood instead. So here we have a back spawning wood. That can be a little bit more difficult to attack than if it was here, for example. So just try to pay attention to how the resources are and how they will be moving their villagers through the game, because if a lot of their food is in the bottom, that's probably where they want to go and defend. And so try to pay attention to those things. It's the same for us as well. We want to think about where are we going to plan our villages to go for. We have all of our food in the top here. We have 1, 2 berry spawns in the bottom, but we have our deers and we have our boar and our second berry here in the top. Therefore, our villas will naturally go towards the north, but we don't need to go out as quickly because we have the sheep, remember. But just a little reminder that it can be very, very good to take a look at this, because being aware of where you want to move your villas can make your base a lot more safe, because you might not need to make as many walls or towers. You can then use your units if your front spawns resources are here, for example. You can use the units that come out of your base to actually defend here. And therefore, it might actually be better to go for the front spawn resources if you have map control than to go for the back ones. Better to save those for later. Alright, so we are aging up. Our opponent aged up as well. We saw that they were on gold, so we need to go check again to see how many are they putting on gold. This can tell us a lot about what strat they're going for. Remember, we can assume that they will go for something like a fast castle, but in reality, they might go for full aggression. And that's going to be a lot more difficult for us to deal with. It will be okay for us as JD, but just in general, it's difficult for us to deal with something that we don't see coming. So always try to figure out what is your opponent doing. We have our first sign here of them not having a lot of food is early farms. Early farms is in general a good sign for us because it means that our opponent's already now prepping to stay in base for a long time. They're playing very narrow, as we call it, which means they are trying to keep their villages in a tight space, try to keep their economy very small. In terms of how wide it is, they want to keep it very small and to just make it easy to defend. Therefore, farms is a very good way to do that. The problem is it's a slow gathering food source, and if there is nothing but farms, the farm setup will take a long time. It'll cost a lot of wood, and so it can be very difficult for them to get that food going that they need for the fast castle units. We see a double tower built here. The 2 towers is, you know, 100% just going to be a fast castle. I mean, you won't ever build 2 towers on your gold if you're not going to go castle. And the same with the villager split. I mean, there's 6 villas here on the gold, and this is 100% going to be a fast castle. There isn't a strat besides fast castling that requires more than like 2-3 villas on gold anyways. If you're doing aggression, you typically see up to 3 villages on gold. If you see second TC, probably no gold villas in the beginning. But if it's a fast castle, you'll see a lot of gold villas. So now we know what the extent of the strat of our opponent is. We know that they have 2 towers on gold, equaling a large amount of gold gathering, equaling fast castle. We also see farms, so that means that they don't want to move out. That means that they're not going to make units. And so we can expect for our opponent to go for a Burgrave, because if they are not going to move out, then they don't need units because they're safe inside their base. So how are they going to get units? Well, they're probably going to go for a Burgrave. And they kind of need to as well. Here we already see how our opponent's economy is sort of laid out. Bill's over here, Aachen Chapel in the back, and we go for a little charge here. If I remember correctly, I lose this first knight because I was a little bit surprised at how many villas he had under the TC. So I do take a little bit of extra damage here, so that's a little bit of a blunder. But try to not lose your units here early. You wanna build up your unit count, because you need them once they get to the Castle Age to both push and to deal with potential Castle Age units. Knights in particular are a great unit to dealing with anything that have a lot of armor or just HP in general, because they have a high base damage. Here, 19 base damage, and that's quite a lot. That means man-at-arms will have a rough time. Any unit really will have a rough time against knights. We have an archer range, we have a school of cavalry, and we have a villager split that says 10, 9, 5. We want to focus on getting a little bit more wood. And you could say, well, what are you going to use that wood for? Primarily archers, actually. The reason we are pre-building archers is so that our opponent just can't full produce spears. We want to have a critical mass of archers, which is about 10, so that we can one-shot the spearmen that are trying to kill our knights, because we're just making archers to keep our knights alive. Alright, so now we're going to come back around here. We're just trying to poke, coming in from the sides. We see that our opponent doesn't have a lot of food. He's still making farms, and that he's going for the Burgrave Palace. Going for the Burgrave Palace, you might think, oh, I need to charge in and deal with this burger. But the thing is, they can go for the Castle Age. That's fine. Because now you know that they have spent 1800 resources going to castle. That means that you should actually, provided you have the same gather rates, in theory have the same amount of units that they just have spent on just doing Burgrave. So an equivalent of 1800 resources in units. We have built up a pretty nice army so far. We have 4 knights, another one coming, 3 archers, 2 scouts, and Archer Sean. And for us, we are just going to keep scaling our production. There's no way we're going to go castle ourselves. If you go castle yourself, you lose. Because that's going to give them enough breathing room to start going out on the map and get the food they need to build up that army. And that's when their castle age pays off. You have to keep staying in feudal, because if you don't, what I just said will happen, but you will also have a tough time trying to contain your opponent, and that's really what you want. You want to contain your opponent in their base. So notice how I'm not charging in 100% of the time here. I'm just trying to circle around until I get that good amount of knights that I need. I also really want to get the armor damage and the armor ranged armor, because not the armor damage, the ranged attack, there we go, and the ranged armor, because ranged armor makes the enemy TC do a little bit less damage, especially to those units that already have armor. And the ranged attack, if our opponent doesn't have any armor upgrades on their man-at-arms, will then make our archers do 2 damage instead of 1, and that's a lot more. That's twice as much damage. Here we see a lot of vills in the woodline. We can then charge in. You should scout to get that vision on the vills, but don't stay in here for too long. Get out again. Just go for those quick charges. Here we killed 4 vills, which is a really, really good amount. We can keep doing this back and forth because our opponent is very interested in getting this wood. So now we can go in again, take a look. See, the opponent here is on the TC. There's a few man-at-arms out. It's very important here that you don't panic when you see man-at-arms like this, because your knights will deal with them, especially if they push out. If you have to fight under the TC, obviously you're going to take damage from the TC as well. And so you have to be careful about that. You want to keep your knights alive so you can heal them later. We see a lot of vills just there, coming onto the woodline. That means we can go in once again. You can see all of the villagers are here. And just getting 1 or 2 vill kills every time we charge in is a pretty big deal. Here, I believe we get quite a lot. So now we're on 10 villager kills. We lost our scout and we lost maybe a knight or 2. A few archers as well. Now we have to watch out, because this is where things can get very grim. We just did the damage we needed to do. Our opponent's on 24 vills and we have 33. But the man-at-arm numbers are starting to climb, so that's the next thing we have to contain. If the man-at-arm numbers get too high, and we have taken too much damage from trying to kill vills, there will be an imbalance, and we will actually potentially lose a very important fight that is going to allow us to end the game. So once we have done this damage here, we actually don't want to get too greedy, so to speak. We want to really try to do that damage control, which is trying to deal with the man-at-arms. If we don't take out the man-at-arms, they're going to build too high, and we can't deal with them. So that's the next step here. Our opponent has 6 man-at-arms. If we went in and lost half of our knights now, that would be really, really difficult for us to deal with. So we have to kill them. Well, fortunately, our opponent is going to try to do something about this. He has maces, and so it can get a little bit micro-intensive. This fight is actually a little bit scary. We're using Jean to snipe out the low man-at-arms. We're using our archers here to try to take some of this blunt damage here, because they don't do any damage anyways. And then we're trying to micro our knights away. If you don't have micro, that is very good in these fights here, then just try to put your archers in front and then your knights in the back, and things should be all right. But micro is always something you can practice, and it becomes quite important in these kinds of fights here. We managed to keep most of our knights alive. That means that in a moment I can use Divine Restoration again and heal up my units. They might not get full health, but they'll get some health, and that's really the most important thing. There we go. So now we are 11.5 minutes into the game. Our opponent just lost all their man-at-arms. They've lost a lot of vills. We just have to seal the deal now. The game is virtually over, but I can still lose the game if I go in and just stand there and lose all my units. So we just have to watch out for that. Another villager goes down. We're just scaling. We've got a second stable. We've got both of the ranged upgrades. Here we go again. Trying to get a little bit extra damage here on the man-at-arms. So the archers there, they did pretty okay damage. And that's because our opponent doesn't have ranged armor just yet. Now we're just getting ready to charge in again. We have about 9 knights and 3 more in queue. We have 12 archers. And so dealing with something like spearmen is not a problem. And here he loses, you know, too many villagers again. And it's a pretty big deal at this stage. So the game should be over. We're just going to speed forward a little bit here. I think at this point I just walk straight into his base. After I kill these man-at-arms here. Here we go. Back and forth, you know, you just don't want to risk it too much. And here we go. And that's pretty much a full base lockdown here. We run out the sides here. We go to check the boar. Go to check the deer. And the game's over. So that's how you do it. You want to deny the food. You want to deny the gold. You want to try to take out as many villas as possible, whilst you yourself don't lose too many units, because you need to do some control later with the man-at-arms. Think about how you do your 2-squad opener. If you don't get a lot of sheep, this can be a lot more difficult, and you might have to be a little bit more careful with how you position your knights and just in general how you raid. Alright, that's pretty much it for me. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.